They lied to her. The Duke died in war, so she married his brother to save the estate. Then the dead Duke walked in during the ceremony. The final moment had come. Rose stood at the altar, Charles at her side, ready to sacrifice her heart for the future of her family. The vows would soon be spoken. But before the priest could say another word, the doors of the church were flung open with a deafening bang, and there stood Duke John, her beloved, alive. His body broken by war, his soul seething with rage. "I'm not dead, Rose," he declared, "and I'm here to take back what's mine." Hello, lovely. If you're enjoying this historic romantic tale, I'd be so grateful for a like or a subscribe. It helps me bring you more stories of love, longing, and history. And if you're up for it, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read every note, and it always brings a smile to my face. Chapter 1. When Hope Dies. The creditors sat like vultures across from Rose's father, their black coats and calculating eyes making the study feel like a tomb. Lady Rose Montgomery stood by the window, her fingers pressed against the cold glass, trying to steady her breathing as Mr. Pemberton, the chief creditor, laid out their ultimatum with brutal efficiency. 2 months, Lord Montgomery. That is all the time we can allow. His voice was flat, businesslike, utterly devoid of sympathy. If the debts are not settled in full by December, we will be forced to seize the estate. The servants will be dismissed. Your household effects will be auctioned. Your family's name will be published in the bankruptcy notices. Rose watched her father age 10 years in that moment. His hands trembled as he gripped the edge of his desk. "Surely, gentlemen, we can negotiate terms." "There are no terms, my lord." Another creditor spoke up, his tone sharp. "You've had 3 months. We've been patient out of respect for your family's loss, but patience has its limits. 2 months, not a day, more." Rose's hand slipped into her pocket, finding the worn paper she kept there always, John's last letter, written before the battle that took him from her. Her fingers traced the creased edges as the creditors droned on about interest rates and legal proceedings. The letter was her talisman, her connection to a man who no longer existed except in memory and grief. "My darling Rose, by the time you read this, the battle will be upon us. I write to you now so that you might know, should anything happen, that my last thoughts were of you, of your smile, of the life we will build together when I return. Wait for me, my love. I promise I will come back to you, and when I do, I will make you my Duchess. You will want for nothing. I will give you the world. Forever yours, John." The memory crashed over her like a wave. John, standing in the Montgomery Gardens on the day he proposed, his hand warm around hers, his eyes burning with certainty and love. The way he'd looked at her like she was his entire world, like nothing else in existence mattered but her. His voice, deep and commanding, promising her a future filled with joy and safety and love. "You are mine, Rose," he'd said, slipping the ring onto her finger. "And I am yours. Nothing will ever change that. Not distance, not war, not anything. I will return to you, and we will have the life we've dreamed of." She'd believed him. She'd believed every word. The door to the study opened, and Rose turned to see her mother entering, her face pale and drawn. Lady Montgomery had aged terribly in the past 3 months, the stress of their situation etching new lines around her eyes and mouth. "Rose, dear, you should sit." "I'm fine, Mother." Rose's voice came out steadier than she felt. She remained by the window, watching the creditors gather their papers, satisfied that their message had been delivered. They filed out one by one, leaving behind a suffocating silence. When the door closed, her father's composure crumbled. He slumped in his chair, his head in his hands. "What have I done?" His voice broke. "What have I done to this family?" Rose moved to his side, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Father, this isn't—" "It is my fault." He looked up at her, his eyes red-rimmed. "The investments I made, the risks I took, I thought I could build something greater for you, for your future with the Duke. And now," he gestured helplessly around the study, "now I've destroyed everything. The Duke is dead, and I've left you with nothing but debt and ruin." The words were a knife to her heart. The Duke is dead. The letter had arrived on a sweltering July afternoon. Rose had been in the garden, reading beneath her favorite oak tree, when she'd heard her mother's scream from inside the house. She'd run, her heart already knowing, somehow, what news awaited her. Her father had stood in the entrance hall, holding the official War Office correspondence, his face ashen. "Lady Rose Montgomery," He'd read aloud, his voice shaking. "It is with profound regret that we inform you of the death of Duke John Frederick, killed in action at the Battle of Nivelles on the 14th of July, 1817. His Grace died bravely in service to the Crown. His body was not recovered. We extend our deepest condolences for your loss." Rose remembered the floor tilting beneath her feet, remembered her vision narrowing to a single point of darkness, remembered nothing after that until she woke in her bed 3 hours later, her mother sitting beside her with tears streaming down her face. The days that followed were a blur of black crepe and condolence calls, and a grief so profound it felt like drowning. Rose couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, could barely breathe around the crushing weight in her chest. She wore mourning black like armor, as if the darkness of her clothes could somehow contain the darkness inside her. But wearing black hadn't been enough. She'd needed answers, needed confirmation that the man she loved was truly gone. Rose had written to the War Office herself, her hand shaking as she penned the letter. She'd contacted John's commanding officer, Captain Morrison, begging for details. She'd even attempted to reach the military hospital records in Brussels, desperate for any information that might tell her John's final moments hadn't been filled with pain. Every response had confirmed the same devastating truth. The Duke was killed in action. His body was never recovered in the chaos of the retreat. "We are deeply sorry for your loss. Duke John Frederick died bravely. He spoke your name before the battle. I am sorry I cannot offer you more comfort. There is no record of the Duke at any military hospital. He died on the battlefield." Each letter had been another nail in the coffin of her hope, another confirmation that John was gone, that the future they'd planned together, the life he'd promised her, was nothing more than ash and memory. 3 months. It had been 3 months of mourning, of grief so all-consuming that Rose sometimes forgot what it felt like to smile. 3 months of waking each morning and remembering, all over again, that John was dead, that she would never see his face, never hear his voice, never feel his arms around her again. And now this. Now her father's financial disaster threatened to destroy what little remained of her world. "The creditors mentioned prison," Rose said quietly, still standing beside her father's chair. "Did they mean that?" Her father's silence was answer enough. Rose's mother made a small, wounded sound. "No, no, they cannot. They can, and they will, if we cannot pay." Her father's voice was hollow. "Rose, your mother's health is already failing from the stress. If I'm taken to debtor's prison, if the scandal becomes public, it will kill her. And you." He looked up at her, his eyes pleading. "You will be ruined, my darling girl. No prospects, no future, nothing. I've failed you. I've failed all of you." Rose felt the walls closing in. She'd tried everything. She'd written to distant relatives, begging for loans. She'd attempted to secure credit using her mother's jewelry as collateral. She'd even considered the unthinkable seeking employment as a governess, though the money would never be enough, and the scandal would destroy them anyway. There were no options left, no solutions, no escape. A sharp knock at the study door made them all jump. The butler entered, his expression carefully neutral. "My lord, my lady Lord Charles Frederick is here. He requests an audience with the family." Rose's breath caught. Charles, John's younger brother. She hadn't seen him since the funeral, where he'd stood apart from the other mourners, his face unreadable. Her father and mother exchanged a glance. Something passed between them, something that made Rose's stomach tighten with unease. "Show him in," her father said quietly. "Father, what?" "Please, Rose." Her father stood, straightening his waistcoat with shaking hands. "Lord Charles may have a solution to our difficulties." The way he said it, the desperate hope in his voice, sent ice through Rose's veins. The butler withdrew, and moments later, Lord Charles Frederick entered the study. He was handsome in a sharp-edged way, his features similar to John's, but harder somehow, more calculating. Where John had commanded a room with warmth and strength, Charles seemed to fill space with cold precision. "Lord Montgomery, Lady Montgomery." He bowed to them, then turned to Rose. His eyes swept over her mourning dress, and something flickered in his expression. "Lady Rose, my deepest condolences, once again for your loss, for our loss." "Lord Charles." Rose's voice was barely a whisper. Her father stepped forward eagerly, too eagerly. "Lord Charles, thank you for coming. That is, we find ourselves in a difficult position, and your letter suggested you might have a proposal that could benefit both our families." Rose's eyes flew to her father. Letter? What letter? Charles smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Indeed. Lord Montgomery, Lady Montgomery, might I have a few moments to speak with Lady Rose? Privately? Rose's mother clutched her throat. I don't think. It's quite all right, mother, Rose heard herself say, though dread pooled in her stomach. Lord Charles, we can speak in the drawing room. Her father's expression relief, mixed with shame, told Rose everything she needed to know. As she led Charles from the study, her hand once again found John's letter in her pocket. She gripped it like a lifeline, even as she felt the future she'd mourned shifting into something else entirely, something she feared she wouldn't survive. Chapter 2. The Devil's Offer. The drawing room had never felt so cold. Rose stood by the fireplace, her hands clasped before her, while Lord Charles Frederick settled himself in the chair John had favoured during his visits. The sight of another man in that seat made her stomach turn. Lady Rose, please sit. Charles's voice was soft, sympathetic. You look as though you might faint. I'm quite well, thank you. Rose remained standing, maintaining what little control she still possessed. You wish to speak with me? Charles studied her for a long moment, his gaze travelling from her face down to her mourning dress and back up again. There was something in his eyes, something she couldn't quite name, that made her skin prickle with unease. I'll be direct, as time is of the essence. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his expression earnest. I'm aware of your family's financial difficulties. Your father has been forthcoming about the severity of the situation. Heat flooded Rose's cheeks. The shame of having their private disaster discussed, analysed, laid bare before John's brother. It was almost too much to bear. I see, her voice was tight. And you've come to offer your condolences on our impending ruin? No. Charles stood, moving closer to her. Too close. I've come to offer you salvation. Rose's breath caught. She took a small step back, but the fireplace was behind her, trapping her. I don't understand, don't you? His voice dropped lower, more intimate. Rose? May I call you Rose? We are, after all, nearly family. Or we were, before my brother's death. The mention of John sent a spike of pain through her chest. She gripped her hands together tighter, her nails digging into her palms. The Frederick estate is in a precarious position, Charles continued, beginning to pace the room. With John's death, there are complications. Legal matters that require immediate attention. The estate needs stability. It needs a duchess. Then I'm sure you'll find someone suitable. I already have. He stopped pacing, turned to face her directly. You. The word hung in the air between them like smoke. Rose stared at him, unable to process what he was suggesting. You cannot possibly mean marriage, Rose. I'm proposing marriage. He moved closer again, and this time she had nowhere to retreat. Think about it logically. The Frederick estate needs a duchess. You were going to be that duchess before tragedy struck. The transition would be seamless. And more importantly, his voice softened, took on a note of gentle concern. I can save your family. I can pay your father's debts. I can ensure your mother receives the medical care she needs. I can preserve the Montgomery name. Rose's mind reeled. Marriage. To Charles. To John's brother. This is madness, she whispered. John has been dead only 3 months. I know. Charles reached out, took her hand in his. His grip was firm, almost too firm. I know this must seem sudden, even improper. But Rose, we don't have the luxury of time. Your father's creditors are demanding payment. Without intervention, your family will be destroyed. She tried to pull her hand away, but he held fast. I know I'm not John, he said, his voice dropping to something that might have been tenderness if not for the calculating gleam in his eyes. I could never be John, but I can give you security, safety. I can protect you and your family from ruin. Isn't that worth something? I loved him. The words tore from her throat. I loved your brother with everything I am. How can you ask me to? I'm asking you to survive. His thumb stroked across her knuckles, the gesture intimate and wrong. John would want you to survive, wouldn't he? He would want your family protected. You know he would. The manipulation in his words was so subtle she almost missed it. Almost. But something deep in her gut twisted with warning. I need time to think. There is no time. Charles released her hand abruptly, pulling a document from his coat pocket. I've already spoken to your father. The first payment to the creditors is due in 3 weeks. If we announce our engagement immediately, I can begin settling the debts. The Frederick resources are considerable. I can make this entire nightmare disappear. He held the document out to her. Rose took it with shaking hands, her eyes scanning the numbers. The amount owed, the payment schedule, the threat of seizure and public auction. 3 weeks, she whispered. 3 weeks, Charles confirmed. Unless we act now. Rose, I need your answer. Not next week, not tomorrow. Now. That's impossible. I can't possibly decide something so momentous in a single conversation. Can't you? He moved behind her, his voice close to her ear. What is there to decide? Either you accept my proposal and save your family, or you refuse and watch them be destroyed. Those are your options. There are no others. Rose's hands trembled so badly the paper rattled. Her mind raced, searching desperately for another solution, another path. But there was nothing. No relatives to help, no loans available, no miracle waiting in the wings. I'll need at least a day to consider. Of course, Charles's agreement came too quickly, too smoothly. He walked around to face her again, his expression understanding. Take a day. Take until tomorrow morning. Though I should mention, he paused, as if the thought had just occurred to him. The creditors are threatening to seize the estate on Monday. Today is Friday. The words were a noose tightening around her throat. 2 days, Rose said, her voice breaking. Give me 2 days. Tomorrow morning, Rose. That's all the time we have. He took her hand again, raised it to his lips. The kiss he pressed to her knuckles lasted a moment too long. I know this isn't the future you imagined, but I promise you, I will take care of you. You'll want for nothing. He left her standing there, clutching the document of her family's debts, her entire body shaking. Rose didn't remember walking to her mother's chambers, didn't remember sitting beside her mother's bed, but suddenly she was there, and her mother was taking her hands, and the words were spilling out. Lord Charles has proposed marriage. He says he can save us, pay the debts, keep father from prison. Her mother's face, already so pale, so thin, seemed to age another decade. Oh, my darling, I can't, Mother. I can't marry him. John is gone. Her mother's voice was gentle but firm. My sweet girl, John is gone, and we are drowning. Sometimes, she squeezed Rose's hands, tears gathering in her eyes. Sometimes we must sacrifice our hearts for our families. Charles is a good man. He's offering us salvation. Can we afford to refuse? But it feels wrong. Something about him feels wrong. Everything feels wrong right now. Her mother reached up, touched Rose's cheek. You're grieving. The whole world feels wrong when you're grieving. But Rose, if we lose this estate, if your father goes to prison, if the scandal destroys our name, what future will you have then? At least with Charles, you'll be a duchess. You'll be protected. Rose thought of the way Charles had looked at her, the way he'd held her hand too long, stood too close, pushed too hard. I don't love him. Love can grow. Her mother's voice was weakening. And safety, security, these are their own kind of love. Charles will take care of you. I know he will. That night, Rose stood in her room, staring at John's portrait on her dressing table. In the painting, he was smiling, his eyes warm and alive and full of promise. She traced the frame with one finger, her tears falling freely now. Forgive me, she whispered to the painted face. Forgive me for what I'm about to do. I have no choice at all. She thought of her father's shame, her mother's failing health, the creditors circling like vultures. She thought of debtors' prison and public disgrace, and a future with nothing, no home, no prospects, no hope. And she thought of Charles's offer. Security, safety, survival. It wasn't love. It wasn't the future she'd dreamed of. But it was something. It was all she had left. The next morning, Rose descended the stairs with leaden feet. Her father waited in the entrance hall, his face gaunt with anxiety. Charles stood beside him, perfectly groomed, perfectly composed. Lady Rose, Charles's eyes lit up when he saw her, and the eagerness in his expression made her stomach turn. Have you reached a decision? Rose's hand found John's letter in her pocket one last time. She felt the worn paper, the creases where she'd held it, the last tangible piece of the man she loved. Then she let it go. I will marry you, Lord Charles. Her voice sounded hollow, distant, like it belonged to someone else. For my family's sake. Charles's smile was brilliant, triumphant. He crossed to her in 3 long strides, took both her hands in his, raised them to his lips. You've made me the happiest of men, Rose. I promise you won't regret this. But as he kissed her hands, as her father sagged with relief behind him, Rose saw something flicker across Charles's face, something cold and satisfied and almost predatory. She had made a terrible mistake. The knowledge settled in her bones like winter frost, but it was too late. The words had been spoken, the agreement made. She had traded her heart for her family's survival, and she could only pray the cost wouldn't destroy her. Chapter 3. The trap closes. The letter from Captain Morrison arrived on a grey November morning, and Rose opened it with hands that no longer trembled. She'd cried all her tears. Now there was only the hollow ache of acceptance. Lady Rose, I write to you once more in response to your inquiry. I can only confirm what I have already stated. Duke John Frederick fell at Nivelles. I was not 20 yards from him when it happened. The chaos of retreat meant his body could not be recovered, but I assure you there is no doubt of his death. I saw him fall. I am profoundly sorry for your loss. Your servant, Captain James Morrison. Rose folded the letter carefully and placed it with the others. 5 letters now, all saying the same thing. John was dead. The War Office confirmed it. His commanding officer confirmed it. The military hospital in Brussels had no record of him. Every avenue she'd pursued had led to the same devastating conclusion. He was gone. She had to accept it, had to move forward, even if moving forward meant marrying Charles. Rose. Charles's voice came from the doorway of the morning room. I've been looking for you. She turned, forcing a smile that felt like cracking glass. I was just reading correspondence. He crossed to her, glanced at the letter in her hand. His expression tightened. Still writing about John? Captain Morrison was kind enough to respond to my inquiries. Rose. Charles took the letter from her hands, set it aside with the others. You must stop this. John is gone. These letters, this constant searching for answers that will never come, it's not healthy. You need to focus on our future now, not the past. The words were reasonable, caring, even. But something in the way he said them, the way his fingers gripped her wrist just a fraction too tight, made her skin prickle. Of course, she murmured. You're right. His smile returned, bright and satisfied. Good. Now, I've finalized the arrangements for the wedding. The ceremony will be at St. Mary's, of course. The guest list is complete, and I've selected your dress. The modist will deliver it next week. Rose blinked. You selected my dress? I wanted to surprise you. He squeezed her hand. White silk, the latest fashion. You'll look beautiful. Charles, I would have preferred to choose. Nonsense. You have enough to worry about. He was already moving toward the door. Oh, and I've decided against inviting any of John's military associates. It would be too melancholy, don't you think? This is meant to be a celebration, but I thought we might honor John's memory by including his friends. No. The word was sharp, final. Charles turned back to her, his expression hardening for just a moment before smoothing into gentleness again. Rose, those men will bring nothing but painful memories. This wedding is about our future, not dwelling on the past. Surely you can understand that. She wanted to argue, wanted to insist on having some say in her own wedding. But the look in his eyes, something cold beneath the surface, warmth, made the words die in her throat. Yes, she whispered. I understand. Excellent. His smile returned. Now, I must return to Frederick Manor. Estate business, you understand. I'll call on you tomorrow. After he left, Rose stood alone in the morning room, feeling the walls closing in around her. The wedding was in 2 weeks. 2 weeks, and she hadn't chosen her dress, hadn't approved the guest list, hadn't made a single decision about her own ceremony. Everything was moving so fast. Too fast, my lady. The housekeeper appeared in the doorway. Lady Margaret is here to see you. Thank the heavens. Rose nearly ran to the drawing room where her friend waited. Margaret took one look at her face and pulled her into an embrace. Oh, Rose, I can't do this, Rose whispered against her friend's shoulder. Margaret, I can't marry him. Then don't. Margaret pulled back, gripped Rose's shoulders. Call it off. There must be another way. There isn't. Rose pulled away, paced to the window. Charles has already begun paying the creditors. My family owes him directly now. If I break the engagement, we'll be indebted to him with no way to repay. We'll be ruined anyway, and it will be my fault. That's manipulation, Rose. Can't you see? He's trapped you. He's saved me. The words came out sharper than she intended. He's saved my family from complete destruction. Yes, it's happening quickly. Yes, I wish I had more control. But Margaret, what choice do I have? Let my father go to prison? Let my mother's health fail from the stress? Condemn my family to scandal and ruin? Margaret's eyes filled with tears. There's always a choice. Not for women like us, Rose's voice broke. You know that as well as I do. We marry who we must, when we must. We do our duty to our families. That's all we have. But you look haunted. You're not sleeping, you barely eat. I'm grieving. Rose wrapped her arms around herself. I'm grieving the man I loved and the future I'll never have. But I'll survive this, Margaret. I have to. Her friend left shortly after, unconvinced but helpless to change anything. The following week, the Dowager Duchess arrived at Frederick Manor. Rose was summoned to take tea with her, and she went with a sense of dread settling in her stomach. The Dowager was everything Rose had imagined, elegant, sharp-eyed, still dressed in deep mourning for John. She studied Rose across the tea service with an intensity that made Rose want to squirm. So, the Dowager said finally, you're to marry my younger son. Yes, Your Grace. Charles seems very eager for this marriage, unusually so. Rose's teacup rattled against the saucer as she set it down. We're both eager to secure our family's futures. Are you? The Dowager's gaze never wavered. Forgive me, child, but you don't look like an eager bride. You look like a woman attending her own execution. The accuracy of the statement stole Rose's breath. The Dowager sighed, set down her own cup. I loved both my sons, but I was not blind to their natures. John was confident, secure in himself. He never needed to prove anything to anyone. But Charles. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Charles has always wanted what John had. As a boy, he coveted his brother's toys, his tutor's attention, his father's approval. I had hoped he would outgrow it. Rose's hands clenched in her lap. Your Grace, if you're suggesting, I'm suggesting nothing. I'm simply concerned. The older woman leaned forward. Charles is my son, and I love him. But Rose, be certain this is what you want. Once vows are spoken, there is no going back. Marriage is forever. I know that. Do you? The Dowager's voice was gentle but probing. Because from where I sit, you look like a woman being led to slaughter, not to a marriage bed. Rose stood abruptly. Your Grace, I appreciate your concern, but my decision is made. Charles has been nothing but kind to me and my family. Whatever reservations I have are simply grief speaking. I will marry him, and I will be a good wife to him. The Dowager rose as well, moved to stand before Rose. She took the younger woman's hands in hers. Then I wish you every happiness, child, but know this: if you ever need help, if you ever need sanctuary, Frederick Manor's doors will be open to you, always. The promise felt like a lifeline Rose couldn't afford to grasp. The days blurred together after that. The wedding dress arrived white silk, as Charles had said, but cut in a style Rose would never have chosen. Too severe, too mature. When she tried it on, she felt like she was wearing a costume for a role she hadn't auditioned for. Charles visited daily, always solicitous, always charming. But Rose began to notice things. The way he watched her when he thought she wasn't looking, his expression calculating. The way he guided her through the manor with a possessive hand at her lower back. The way he'd managed to isolate her from nearly everyone, except her immediate family and his mother. Lady Margaret came less frequently. Charles always seemed to arrive just as she was leaving, making pointed comments about Rose needing rest. John's former friends never came at all, their invitations quietly dismissed. A servant mentioned in passing that Charles had given orders for all mail to be brought directly to him first, before being distributed to the household. When Rose asked him about it, his explanation was smooth as honey. I simply wanted to shield you from any distressing correspondence during this difficult time. You've been through so much, my dear. Let me handle these burdens for you. It sounded like care. It felt like a cage. The night before the wedding, Rose stood in her room, staring at the white silk dress hanging like a ghost on her wardrobe door. Tomorrow she would wear that dress, speak those vows, become Charles's wife, become Charles's property, by law. She moved to her dressing table, opened the locked drawer where she kept her most precious possessions. John's letters lay there, tied with a black ribbon. She pulled out the last one, the one he'd written before the battle. Wait for me, my love. I promise I will come back to you, and when I do, I will make you my Duchess. A broken promise, a beautiful, terrible lie. Rose pressed the letter to her lips, tasted salt from tears she hadn't realized were falling. I'm so sorry, my love," she whispered to the empty room. "I'm so sorry I couldn't wait longer. I'm so sorry I'm not strong enough to refuse. Forgive me. Please, wherever you are, forgive me." She placed the letter back in the drawer, locked it with shaking hands. Tomorrow, she would become Lady Charles Frederick. Tomorrow, she would begin a life she'd never wanted, with a man who made her skin crawl, even as he smiled at her. Tomorrow, her future would be sealed. And tonight, in the darkness of her room, Rose let herself mourn not just for John, but for herself. For the girl who'd believed in love and promises, for the future that had died on a battlefield in Nivelles. Outside her window, rain began to fall, drumming against the glass like tears the sky wept for her. Tomorrow, there would be a wedding. Tonight, there was only grief. Chapter 4. The ceremony interrupted. Rose stared at her reflection in the looking-glass and saw a stranger. The woman in white silk looked like a bride, but her eyes were empty, her face the color of marble. Dead. She looked dead. "Oh, my darling, you're beautiful." Her mother's voice trembled with emotion as she adjusted the veil. "Simply beautiful." Rose said nothing. There were no words left inside her. Her mother's hands fluttered to Rose's shoulders, squeezing gently. "I know this isn't what you imagined, but Charles is a good man. He saved us, Rose, saved all of us. Your father can hold his head up again. The creditors are satisfied. We have a future because of him." Because of him. The words echoed in Rose's hollow chest. Yes, Charles had paid the debts. Charles had rescued them from ruin, and now Rose would pay the price for that rescue for the rest of her life. "Are you ready, dearest?" No, she would never be ready. But she nodded anyway, because what else could she do? Downstairs, her father waited in the entrance hall. When he saw her, his eyes filled with tears. "My beautiful girl." He looked lighter than he had in months. The crushing weight of debt and shame finally lifted from his shoulders. "I'm so proud of you, so grateful for your sacrifice." Sacrifice. That's what this was. A sacrifice on the altar of duty and survival. The carriage ride to St. Mary's Church passed in a blur. Through the window, Rose could see London society lining the streets, craning for a glimpse of the bride. The tragic tale had captured everyone's imagination, the grieving fiancée marrying her dead beloved's devoted brother. How romantic, how noble, if only they knew the truth. The church loomed before them, its stone facade grey and imposing beneath the December sky. Rose's hands clenched around her bouquet of white roses until the stems bit into her palms through her gloves. "Rose," her father covered her hand with his. "You can still—" "No." The word came out flat, final. "I can't. We both know I can't." He said nothing more, but his silence was heavy with guilt and gratitude in equal measure. The church was packed, every pew filled, every face turned toward her as she stepped through the doors. The whispers started immediately, a rustling susurrus of speculation and sympathy that made Rose's skin crawl. The organ began to play, the notes heavy and ominous rather than joyful. Rose's feet moved automatically, one step after another down the endless aisle. Her father's arm was the only thing keeping her upright, and at the altar, Charles waited. For the first time, Rose truly saw the expression on his face. Not love, not even affection. It was possession, pure and simple. He looked at her the way a man might look at a prize he'd won, a treasure he'd claimed. His smile was triumphant, satisfied, almost predatory. Terror shot through her like lightning. What have I done? But it was too late. Too late to run, too late to refuse, too late for anything but moving forward into the trap she'd walked into with open eyes. Her father released her arm, stepped back. Rose stood alone beside Charles at the altar, feeling the weight of hundreds of watching eyes. The vicar opened his prayer book, his voice sonorous and practiced. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here in the sight of our Maker to witness the joining of this man and this woman in holy matrimony." Rose's hands trembled so violently she nearly dropped her bouquet. The white roses blurred before her eyes. Charles noticed. His hand shot out, gripping her wrist with bruising force. He leaned close, his breath hot against her ear. "Steady," he whispered. It wasn't comfort. It was a warning. The vicar droned on. Rose couldn't focus on the words. The church was too hot, too crowded, too wrong. Her corset felt like it was crushing her ribs. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could barely stand. Marriage is not to be entered into lightly, but soberly and with reverence. This was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. But what choice did she have? What choice had she ever had? The vicar's voice rose and fell in practiced rhythm. Rose felt herself swaying, the room tilting dangerously. Charles's grip on her wrist tightened, holding her upright through sheer force. If any person can show just cause why they may not be joined together, let them speak now, or forever hold their peace. The silence stretched. Rose closed her eyes, sent up one final desperate prayer to a man who could not hear her. John, if you're out there, if there's any part of you that still exists, save me. Please, save me. The silence continued. Of course it did. The dead don't answer prayers. And then, bang, the church doors exploded open with a crash that echoed like cannon fire. The sound shattered the silence, shattered the moment, shattered everything. Every head whipped around. Gasps erupted throughout the congregation. Someone screamed. Rose's eyes flew open, and there, framed in the doorway like a vision conjured from her desperate prayers, stood John Frederick. But not the John she remembered. This man was transformed. Broader, harder, dangerous, in a way the gentleman she'd known had never been. His uniform was travel-stained, his boots muddy, his dark hair wild from riding, a vicious scar cut from his left temple down to his jaw, white against his sun-darkened skin. But his eyes were the same, and they blazed with fury and possession, and something so fierce it stole the breath from her lungs. He looked like a warrior who had fought his way back from the very depths of the abyss itself. Rose's knees buckled. The world tilted violently. Only Charles's iron grip kept her from collapsing to the floor. The church erupted into chaos. Screams, shouts, people leaping to their feet. The organ player hit a discordant note and stopped. The vicar stumbled backward, his prayer book falling from nerveless fingers, and through it all, John stood motionless in the doorway, his gaze locked on Rose with an intensity that made her feel like everything else in the world had ceased to exist. This ceremony ends, his voice cut through the chaos like a blade, commanding instant silence. Now, the vicar found his voice stammering. "Why, Your Grace," we thought, the War Office declared. "You were killed at Nivelles." John's eyes never left Rose's face. The War Office was given false information. Letters were destroyed. Records were altered. Finally, his gaze shifted to Charles, and the temperature in the church plummeted. "I am very much alive, and my brother knew it." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Rose felt Charles's hand spasm on her wrist. She turned to look at him and saw his mask slip just for 1 second. Pure hatred flashed across his features before he schooled them back into shocked innocence. "Brother!" Charles's voice was loud, jovial, desperate. "What a miracle! Thank the heavens. But surely you understand we all thought you dead." The estate required immediate attention. Rose's family needed help. "Do not." John took a step forward, and Rose watched grown men instinctively step back from him. There was something in his bearing now, something that spoke of battlefields and death and survival at any cost. "Do not lie to me, Charles. Not here, not in front of witnesses, not in front of her." Rose found her voice, though it came out barely a whisper. "You're alive." John's expression transformed the instant he looked at her. The fury melted into something raw and desperate and achingly tender. "I am. I fought my way back to you, Rose. Through hell itself, through every obstacle imaginable, I fought to return to you." His voice dropped, intimate despite the hundreds of witnesses, "and I arrived to find my own brother trying to steal what's mine." The possessiveness in his words should have frightened her, should have felt like just another cage, another man claiming ownership of her life. Instead, Rose felt her heart, which had been dead and buried for months, suddenly restart, felt warmth flooding back into veins that had been frozen, felt, for the first time since that terrible July day, like she could breathe again. "Steal," Charles's voice rose, defensive and angry. "I was saving her family from complete destruction. Where were you, John? Dead in some battlefield, leaving the rest of us to pick up the pieces. I did what was necessary." "Necessary?" John's hand moved to his coat, pulled out a folded paper. His smile was cold, predatory. "You want to talk about what was necessary? Shall I read this aloud?" The letter from the War Office, dated the 15th of October, 2 months ago, confirming that I was alive, recovering in Brussels, and requesting immediate contact with my family. The church gasped as one. Rose's free hand flew to her throat. Charles's face went white, then flooded with red. You have no proof of any wrongdoing. If such a letter existed and was misplaced— Misplaced? John's voice was deadly quiet. The estate steward will testify that you ordered all War Office correspondence delivered directly to you, that you opened this letter in his presence, that you told him to speak of it to no one. He pulled out more papers. And perhaps you can explain these. 3 letters I sent to Rose from Brussels, all addressed to Montgomery Estate, all intercepted at Frederick Manor before they could be forwarded. Another paper, and this communication from Captain Morrison to the family, confirming my survival and expected return date, also intercepted. The evidence mounted with each word. The congregation's murmurs grew louder, more shocked, more condemning. Charles's mask shattered completely, his face twisted with years of resentment and jealousy. So what if I did? So what if I saw an opportunity and took it? You had everything, John, everything. The title, the estate, father's love, mother's devotion, the respect of every man in England. And her, he gestured violently at Rose. You had her, the most beautiful woman in London, and you didn't even appreciate it enough to stay alive for her. Rose flinched as if struck. John took another step forward, and this time Charles actually stumbled backward. You manipulated a woman in mourning. You exploited her family's desperation. You betrayed your own blood. And you call that taking an opportunity? The church had gone deathly silent. Every eye fixed on the 2 brothers, on the bride trapped between them, on the scandal unfolding before them. Charles opened his mouth, closed it. His grip on Rose's wrist finally loosened and fell away. John held out his hand to her. Rose, come here. It wasn't a request. It was a command. And Rose, who had spent months feeling dead inside, who had been about to shackle herself to a man who made her skin crawl, who had given up every hope of happiness, Rose stepped toward him. Her hand found his, and the moment their fingers touched, she felt it. The spark, the connection, the absolute rightness of it. John's hand closed around hers, warm and strong and alive. I've got you, he said softly, for her ears alone. I've got you, and I'm never letting go again. And Rose, standing in her wedding dress in a church full of shocked witnesses, finally let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to sacrifice everything after all. Maybe she could have what she'd thought was lost forever. Maybe she could have him. Chapter 5. The Unmasking. Charles's face cycled through shock, fury, and desperation in rapid succession. He straightened his shoulders, attempting to regain the authority that was visibly crumbling around him. This is ridiculous. Even if such a letter existed, it could have been a clerical error, a mistake in the War Office records. Enough! John's voice cut through Charles's protests like a knife through silk. He raised his hand, signaling toward the back of the church. Mr. Pemberton, if you would. An elderly man rose from one of the rear pews, his movement slow but dignified. Rose recognized him, the Frederick estate steward, who had served the family for over 40 years. He walked down the aisle with measured steps, his weathered face grave. Your Grace. He bowed to John, then turned to face the congregation, his voice clear despite his age. Forgive me for what I must say, but I can no longer remain silent. Mr. Pemberton, you will say nothing. Charles started forward, but John moved to block him, a subtle shift that nonetheless conveyed absolute authority. The steward continued as if Charles hadn't spoken. Lord Charles gave explicit orders that all War Office correspondence be delivered to him personally. When I questioned this instruction, he said he wished to spare the household any further distress should more tragic news arrive. The congregation leaned forward, hanging on every word. On the 15th of October, a letter arrived from the War Office. I personally handed it to Lord Charles in the estate library. I watched him read it. The old man's voice trembled slightly. When he finished, his face went white. I asked if there was more bad news. He told me it was a mistake, a clerical confusion, and that I should speak of it to no one. He said discussing false hope would only cause the family more pain. You're lying, Charles's voice cracked. You senile old fool. You don't know what you saw. I know exactly what I saw, my lord. The steward's dignity was unshakable. I've served this family for 43 years. I know the War Office seal. I know their correspondence format. That letter confirmed His Grace's survival. And you hid it. A collective gasp rippled through the church. The Dowager Duchess rose from her pew near the front, her face ashen beneath her black veil. Charles. Her voice shook with a mixture of rage and grief so profound it seemed to age her before their eyes. "Stop. Just stop this shameful display." She turned to John, her hands trembling. "You said you have more proof." John reached into his coat, produced a bundle of letters tied with string. 3 letters I sent to Rose from the military hospital in Brussels, all addressed to Frederick Manor, where they should have been forwarded to Montgomery Estate. All intercepted. He held up another paper. "And this a communication from my commanding officer, Captain Morrison, informing the family of my survival and expected return. Also intercepted." He looked at Rose, and his voice softened, the steel melting into something tender. "I wrote to you every week, Rose, told you I was healing, told you I was coming home, told you to wait for me, that nothing would keep me from you." His jaw tightened. "Every letter was stolen before it could reach you." Rose's hand flew to her throat, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't know. John, I swear I didn't know. I thought you were dead. I mourned you. I know." John's gaze never wavered from hers. "This isn't your fault. None of this is your fault. This is his doing, and his alone." Charles's carefully constructed mask finally shattered completely, his face contorted with years of suppressed bitterness and jealousy. A harsh, ugly laugh tore from his throat. "So what if I hid the letters? So what if I saw an opportunity and took it?" His voice rose, echoing off the stone walls. "John got everything our entire lives. Everything. The title, the estate, father's love, mother's devotion, the respect of every man in England." He pointed at Rose, his finger shaking. "And you. He had you the most beautiful woman in London, completely devoted to him, and he didn't even appreciate it enough to stay. He left you to chase glory on some battlefield, left you grieving and alone while I was here. I was the one who stayed." The church had gone deathly silent. Even the children had stopped fidgeting. "I deserved something," Charles's voice cracked. "I deserved to be more than the spare, the shadow, the forgotten son. When that first letter came saying he was dead, I thought finally, it's my turn. But then the second letter came, confirming he was alive, and I realized." He laughed again, the sound breaking at the edges. "I realized I could have it all anyway. All I had to do was stay quiet. All I had to do was let everyone keep believing the lie." The dowager swayed, gripping the pew for support. "Charles, what have you done? What have you become?" "I saved this family." Charles spun to face her, his composure completely gone. "The estate was in chaos without a duke. I brought order. I rescued the Montgomerys from complete destruction. I would have been a good husband to Rose, better than John, who abandoned her for military glory." "Better?" John's voice was soft, deadly. He moved forward with deliberate slowness, and Rose watched grown men instinctively step back to clear his path. There was something in his bearing now, something forged in battle and survival that commanded absolute respect through presence alone. He stopped directly in front of his brother, close enough that Charles had to tilt his head back slightly to maintain eye contact. John didn't shout, didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. "You manipulated a grieving woman. You exploited her family's desperation. You betrayed your own blood, your own brother. For what? A title? An estate?" John's voice dropped even lower, intimate and terrible. "You are no brother of mine. You are a coward and a snake, and you will leave this church, leave London, and if I ever see your face again, I will forget we share a name." Charles's face went through another rapid transformation, shock, rage, and finally, desperate calculation. His eyes darted to Rose, and Rose saw the moment he decided to make one final play. "Rose, please." He reached for her, his fingers closing around her wrist. "I do care for you, truly. We can still—" He never finished the sentence. John moved with the fluid precision of a trained soldier. His hand shot out, catching Charles's wrist in an iron grip. There was no visible effort in the movement, no strain in his expression. He simply applied pressure, and Charles gasped in pain, his fingers releasing Rose immediately. "Touch her again," John said conversationally, as if discussing the weather, "and I'll break more than your grip." He released Charles with a small shove that sent his brother stumbling backward. Charles caught himself on a pew, his face flushed with humiliation and impotent rage. The dowager stepped forward, her voice ringing with authority despite her obvious distress. "Footmen, remove him. Now." 2 liveried servants materialized from the sides of the church, moving to flank Charles. He looked between them, then at his mother, then at John and Rose. "You'll regret this." Charles's voice rose to nearly a shout as they took his arms. "All of you. The scandal will destroy her reputation. She'll be ruined. No one will receive her." John didn't even turn to look at him. His attention remained fixed on Rose. "She'll be a duchess. My duchess. No scandal can touch her." The finality in his tone made it clear the discussion was over. Charles was escorted down the aisle, still protesting, still making threats that rang hollow against the stone walls. The church doors opened, and he was ushered out into the grey December afternoon. The doors closed behind him with a definitive thud. For a moment, no one moved. Then the whispers started a rustling wave of shock and speculation that grew louder with each passing second. The vicar, who had stood frozen throughout the entire confrontation, finally found his voice. That is. In light of these revelations, I declare this ceremony void and invalid. There will be no marriage today." The congregation began to move, people gathering their belongings, turning to their neighbors with wide eyes and excited voices. They would dine out on this scandal for months. But Rose barely noticed them leaving. She stood at the altar in her white silk dress, shaking so violently she thought her legs might give out. The events of the past hour crashed over her in waves. John alive, Charles's betrayal, the confrontation, the letters, everything she'd believed shattered and reformed in the space of minutes. The church emptied slowly, people casting glances back at the dramatic tableau as they filed out. The dowager paused beside John, placed a hand on his arm. "We need to talk," she said quietly. "About all of this. About Charles. About what happens next." "Later, Mother." John's voice was gentle but firm. "Give us a moment, please." She nodded, pressed a kiss to his scarred cheek, and followed the last of the guests out. The vicar bowed and departed. The heavy doors closed with a resonant boom, and then they were alone. Rose and John, standing in the empty church, 3 feet of charged space between them. She couldn't look at him, couldn't process any of it. Her mind felt like it was splintering. "Rose," his voice was low. "Careful. Look at me." She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I can't, please." The single word, spoken with such gentle command, made her lift her eyes to his. And there he was, John, her John, alive, real, standing before her with that terrible scar marking his face and his eyes full of an emotion so intense it stole her breath. "I came back for you," he said simply. "I fought my way through hell itself to come back to you, and I will always come back for you. Do you understand? You're really alive," her voice broke. "You're really here. I thought I mourned you. I know. I know what you thought. I know what Charles made you believe." His hands flexed at his sides, as if he was physically restraining himself from reaching for her. "But I'm here now. I'm alive, and I'm never, ever leaving you again." The promise in his words, the absolute certainty, finally broke through the shock that had been holding her together. Rose's knees buckled. John caught her before she hit the ground, his arms coming around her with a gentleness that belied their strength. He pulled her against his chest, one hand cradling her head, the other wrapped firmly around her waist. "I've got you," he murmured into her hair. "I've got you, Rose. You're safe now." And Rose, who had been dead inside for months, who had been about to marry a man who made her skin crawl, who had given up every hope of happiness, Rose clung to him and sobbed. She cried for the months of grief, for the manipulation and lies, for the future she'd thought she'd lost, for the overwhelming relief of having it back. And through it all, John held her, steady, solid, alive. For the first time in months, Rose felt safe. For the first time in months, she felt like she might survive this after all. Chapter 6. Claiming what's his. The carriage ride to Frederick Manor passed in a blur. Rose sat, pressed against John's side, his arm around her shoulders, anchoring her to reality. Her parents sat across from them, her mother weeping quietly into her handkerchief, her father's face a mixture of relief and lingering guilt. The Dowager Duchess rode in a separate carriage behind them, along with Lady Margaret. Rose couldn't stop trembling. The shock was beginning to wear off, replaced by a cascade of emotions too overwhelming to process. John was alive. Charles had betrayed her. She'd almost married a monster. John was alive. The thought kept circling through her mind like a prayer. When they arrived at Frederick Manor, John didn't wait for the footman. He opened the carriage door himself, then turned and lifted Rose down as if she weighed nothing. His hands lingered at her waist, steadying her when her legs threatened to give out. "Easy," he murmured. "I've got you." He kept one arm around her as he guided her into the house, through the entrance hall, and into the drawing room. The servants scattered at his approach, their faces shocked at seeing their supposedly dead master returned. John settled Rose on the sofa, grabbed a blanket from a nearby chair, and wrapped it around her shoulders with surprising gentleness. She was shaking so badly her teeth chattered, though the room wasn't cold. "Tea," John ordered a hovering maid. "Hot, with plenty of sugar. And brandy. Quickly." The maid curtsied and fled. John knelt before Rose, his hands covering hers. "Breathe, Rose. Just breathe. You're safe now." I don't." The words wouldn't form properly. Her mind felt like it was fragmenting. "You don't have to talk. You don't have to do anything right now except sit here and let me take care of you." His voice was firm, commanding, but underneath it was a tenderness that made her eyes sting with fresh tears. Her father cleared his throat from the doorway. "Your Grace, I need to apologize for my part in this terrible situation. I was desperate, but I should never have allowed Rose to be put in such a position. I should have found another way." John stood, turning to face Rose's father. His expression was stern but not unkind. "Your debts are paid, all of them, as of this morning. You owe nothing to anyone, least of all my brother." Rose's father went white. "Your Grace, we cannot possibly accept such the amount is—" "It's done." John's voice cut through the protest with absolute finality. "Rose is to be my wife. That makes her family my family. The matter is closed. But Your Grace, the sum is enormous. We have no way to repay. I don't want repayment." John's tone softened slightly. "Lord Montgomery, I understand you were trying to protect your family. Charles exploited that desperation. The fault lies with him, not with you. Accept my help with grace, and let us move forward." Rose's mother approached, tears streaming down her face. She took John's hand in both of hers, her voice breaking. "You saved us. You saved all of us. You saved her." John's gaze shifted to Rose, still huddled on the sofa beneath the blanket. "She saved herself by surviving. I merely removed the obstacles." The tea arrived, and John personally handed Rose a cup, his fingers brushing hers. "Drink, all of it. It will help with the shock." She obeyed mechanically, the hot liquid burning down her throat. The brandy in it made her cough, but the warmth began to spread through her chest, easing some of the trembling. The drawing-room door opened, and the Dowager Duchess entered. She looked like she'd aged a decade in the past hour. Her face was drawn, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. "John," her voice was hollow. "We must discuss, Charles." John's jaw tightened. "Library. Now." He looked at Rose. "I'll be just a moment. Lady Margaret is here. She'll sit with you." Margaret slipped into the room as John and his mother left. She immediately sat beside Rose, taking her hand. In the library, the Dowager stood by the window, staring out at the grounds. John closed the door behind them. "He cannot stay in London," she said without preamble. "The scandal, what he's done. John, this will destroy our family's reputation. The scandal will pass. These things always do." John poured himself a brandy, didn't drink it. "Charles leaves tonight. I've already sent word to prepare the Cornwall estate. He goes there, and he stays there. If he attempts to return to London, I'll have him arrested for fraud and attempted theft. He's your brother. He stopped being my brother the moment he tried to steal my future." John's voice was hard as granite. "Mother, I won't destroy him publicly for your sake. I could have him prosecuted. I could ruin him completely. But I won't, because you don't deserve that pain. But he will not remain in my sight. I cannot guarantee his safety, if he does." The Dowager turned, tears on her cheeks. "I failed you both. I saw his jealousy, his resentment, and I did nothing. I told myself he would outgrow it, that brotherly rivalry was natural, but it festered into something poisonous, and I did nothing." John crossed to her, placed a hand on her shoulder. "This isn't your fault. Charles made his choices. He chose deception, manipulation, betrayal. Those were his decisions, not yours. He's my son. And he hurt someone I love. There are consequences for that." John's voice softened slightly. "Mother, I know this is painful, but I will not sacrifice Rose's well-being for Charles's comfort. Not now. Not ever." Back in the drawing room, Rose had finally stopped shaking enough to speak coherently. Margaret held her hand, listening as Rose's words tumbled out in a rush. I almost married him. Margaret, I was standing at that altar, about to speak vows to that man. If John hadn't arrived, her voice broke. If he'd been 5 minutes later, but he wasn't. He arrived in time. Rose, you didn't marry Charles. You're free. He came back. Rose's tears flowed freely now. I thought I'd lost him forever. I mourned him. I was ready to sacrifice everything because I thought he was gone. And he came back. What are you going to do now? Rose shook her head helplessly. I don't know. I feel everything all at once, relief that John's alive, gratitude that he stopped the wedding, shame that I didn't see through Charles's lies, fear of what society will say. And John? Margaret's voice was gentle. What do you feel about John? Rose closed her eyes, pressed her free hand to her chest where her heart was pounding. My heart is his. It never stopped being his. Even agreeing to marry Charles, even at that altar, my heart belonged to John. But Margaret, she opened her eyes, met her friend's gaze. I'm so tired. I don't know if I can trust my own judgment anymore. I was so easily manipulated, so easily deceived. You were grieving and desperate. Charles is a skilled liar. None of this reflects poorly on you. The library door opened, and John emerged. He glanced around the drawing room, then his eyes found Rose. Whatever he saw in her face made his expression soften. Thank you all for coming, he said, his voice polite but firm. But I think Rose needs rest now. If you wouldn't mind. It wasn't really a request. Rose's parents and Margaret gathered their things, each stopping to embrace Rose before they left. The Dowager paused beside John. Take care of her, she whispered. Always. When the door closed behind the last of them, the sudden silence felt deafening. John crossed the room, sat beside Rose on the sofa. The cushions dipped under his weight. He took her hand, his thumb stroking across her knuckles. You need rest. Everything else can wait. John. Rose turned to face him, questions tumbling through her mind. I need to understand. Why didn't you write to me directly? Why send letters to Frederick Manor? I did write to you directly. 12 letters to Montgomery Estate. His expression darkened. Did you receive any of them? Rose's blood ran cold. No, none. John's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath the scar. Charles intercepted correspondence at both estates. He was thorough, I'll give him that. The magnitude of the deception made Rose's head spin. He controlled everything, the letters, the information, even when I tried to verify your death. I know, and he'll pay for it. John's voice promised retribution. Rose looked down at their joined hands. The debts you paid? John, that's an enormous sum. I cannot possibly. John's free hand came up, cupping her face and gently forcing her to meet his eyes. The touch was firm, possessive, demanding her attention. Rose, listen to me very carefully. His voice dropped lower, more intense. Everything I have is yours. My money, my estates, my title, my life, all of it is yours. It was always yours, from the moment I asked you to be my wife. Charles using your family's debts to trap you was an abomination. I removed the trap, that's all. But the amount means nothing to me. His thumb stroked her cheekbone. You mean everything. Your safety, your happiness, your freedom, those are worth any price. Rose's eyes filled with tears again. I don't deserve this. I don't deserve you. I was going to marry your brother. You were lied to, manipulated, coerced. John leaned closer, his forehead nearly touching hers. You deserve everything, Rose, and I intend to spend the rest of my life giving it to you. The moment shifted, the air between them charging with something electric. Rose's breath caught. What happens now? She whispered. Now? John's lips curved into a small smile. Now you rest. Tomorrow, we announce our engagement, our real engagement. Next week, we marry. And then, I spend the rest of my life making you happy. People will talk. The scandal will be everywhere. They'll say terrible things about me. John's smile turned predatory, dangerous. Let them talk. You'll be a duchess. My duchess. Anyone who dares question you, anyone who dares speak against you, will answer to me. I promise you, Rose, no scandal will touch you. I won't allow it. The possessiveness in his words should have frightened her, should have felt like just another cage after escaping Charles's trap. Instead, Rose felt cherished, protected, claimed in a way that made her feel safe, rather than imprisoned. She didn't fight against it. She leaned into it, into him. "I missed you," she whispered, the words breaking. "I thought I would die from missing you." The grief was so heavy I could barely breathe. "I'm here now." John pulled her closer, wrapped his arms around her. "I'm here, and I'm not letting you go. Ever. Do you understand me? Never again." Rose buried her face against his chest, felt the solid reality of him, heard his heartbeat strong and steady beneath her ear. He was real. He was alive. He was here. "Promise me," she said against his coat. "Promise me this isn't a dream." "I promise." His lips pressed against her hair. "I fought my way back from hell for you, Rose. I'm not going anywhere." And for the first time in months, Rose let herself believe in happiness again. Chapter 7. The Scandal and the Claim. The scandal sheets were merciless. Rose sat in Frederick Manor's morning room, staring at the newspaper Lady Margaret had reluctantly brought her. The headlines screamed across the page in bold black ink. "Shocking scene at St. Mary's. Bride switches brothers at the altar. Lady Rose's deception. Did she know the Duke lived?" The Frederick scandal. One woman, two brothers, and a fortune at stake. The words beneath were even worse. Rose forced herself to read them, though each sentence felt like a knife. Sources close to the family suggest Lady Rose Montgomery played the Frederick brothers against each other in a calculated bid to secure the duchy. One must wonder if the grieving fiancé was quite as innocent as she appeared. "Stop reading that poison." Lady Margaret snatched the paper away. "It's all lies, and you know it." "Do I?" Rose's voice was hollow. "Margaret, look at the facts from their perspective. I was engaged to John. He was declared dead. Within 3 months, I'm engaged to his brother. Then John miraculously appears at the wedding. It looks like you were manipulated by a villain, which is exactly what happened." Margaret gripped Rose's hands. "But society doesn't care about truth. They care about scandal." Rose had barely left Frederick Manor in the 3 days since the disastrous wedding. The Dowager had insisted she stay, providing sanctuary from the storm raging outside. But even within these walls, Rose couldn't escape the whispers. The servants spoke in hushed tones. The morning callers had stopped coming entirely. No one wanted to be associated with the scandal. Rose had become a pariah, tainted by circumstances beyond her control. "They're calling me a schemer," Rose whispered. "A heartless flirt. Some are saying I should be cut from society entirely. Those same people were cooing over your tragic romance just a week ago." Margaret's voice was sharp with anger. "Society is fickle and cruel, especially to women." The morning room door opened, and the Dowager Duchess entered. She'd been a steadfast ally these past days, her presence lending Rose protection that would have otherwise been absent. "I've just returned from Lady Pembroke's," the Dowager said, settling into a chair with a weary sigh. "The gossip is extensive." "I was manipulated and lied to," Rose said, her voice breaking. "And somehow I'm the villain in this story. How is that possible? Society is rarely fair to women, my dear. We are blamed for men's sins more often than not." The Dowager's expression softened. "But you have an advantage." "What advantage could I possibly have?" "You have John." The Dowager smiled slightly. "And John will not allow this to stand. He's been away handling certain matters, but when he returns, you'll see. My son does not lose battles, Rose. Not on battlefields, and not in ballrooms." John had left the morning after the confrontation, explaining only that he had business to attend to. Rose hadn't seen him in 3 days, and his absence felt like a wound. She'd just gotten him back, and already he was gone again. But late that afternoon, the sound of hooves on gravel announced his return. Rose found him in the entrance hall, and her breath caught. He was dressed in full ducal regalia, formal coat with his military medals displayed across his chest, cravat perfectly tied, boots polished to a mirror shine. He looked every inch the powerful duke he was. When he saw her, his expression transformed from austere to tender. He crossed to her in 3 long strides. "How are you holding up?" "I've been better." Rose tried to smile and failed. "The scandal is everywhere, John. It's all anyone can talk about." "I know. I've read the papers." His jaw tightened. "Which is why we're attending the Worthington ball tonight." Rose's blood went cold. "What? John, I can't possibly—" "You can, and you will." His voice was firm but not unkind. "Every member of the ton will be there. It's the perfect opportunity." "For what? For them to cut me to my face instead of behind my back?" Rose's voice rose with panic. "John, They're saying terrible things. They think I'm a schemer, a manipulator. If I show my face, they'll tear me apart." John took both her hands in his grip strong and steadying. "Let them try. Rose, you're going to walk in on my arm as my betrothed, and anyone who dares slight you will regret it. I'm frightened." John dropped to one knee before her, still holding her hands, bringing them to his lips. "I know you are. But Rose, you are going to be a duchess. My duchess. It's time society learns exactly what that means." The conviction in his voice sent a shiver through her. "And what does it mean?" "It means you're untouchable. It means you have my protection, my name, my power behind you. It means anyone who dares speak against you will answer to me." His eyes blazed with intensity. "Trust me, Rose, I won't let them hurt you." That evening, Rose stood in her borrowed chambers at Frederick Manor, staring at the gown John had sent up. It was deep sapphire blue silk, the bodice embroidered with silver thread that caught the light, not black, not even grey. A statement. The maid helped her into it, then brought out a velvet case. Inside lay a diamond necklace so magnificent, Rose gasped. "His Grace said you're to wear these," the maid said quietly. "They're the Frederick family jewels. Every duchess has worn them." Another statement. When Rose descended the stairs, John was waiting. His eyes travelled over her slowly, appreciation and possession mingling in his gaze. "Perfect," he murmured, offering his arm. "Are you ready?" "No, but I'll go anyway." His smile was fierce. "That's my girl." They arrived at the Worthington estate fashionably late, another calculated move. The ball was already in full swing when they were announced. His Grace, the Duke of Frederick, and Lady Rose Montgomery. The ballroom fell silent. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence. Every head turned. Rose felt the weight of hundreds of eyes on her. The whispers started immediately, a rustling susurrus of speculation and judgment. John didn't pause. He kept his head high, his bearing absolutely confident, and walked Rose directly toward the center of the ballroom. His message was clear. They had nothing to hide, nothing to be ashamed of. But as they moved through the crowd, several older matrons deliberately turned their backs. Lady Ashford, Mrs. Pemberton, the Duchess of Somerset. The cuts were deliberate, unmistakable. Rose felt each one like a slap. Her steps faltered. John felt it immediately. He stopped walking, turned to face the room, and his voice rang out with absolute authority. "I want to ensure there is no confusion among those present," his words carried to every corner of the ballroom. "Lady Rose Montgomery is my betrothed. She was deceived and manipulated by my brother, who will not show his face in London again. Any person who questions her honor questions mine. I trust I make myself clear. The silence was absolute. No one moved. No one dared even whisper. Then, from across the room, the Duchess of Pembroke stepped forward. She was the highest-ranking woman present, and her endorsement or condemnation could make or break a reputation. "Your Grace," she curtsied to John, then turned to Rose with a warm smile. "Lady Rose, I would be honored if you would join me for tea tomorrow. I find I'm in desperate need of sensible conversation, and you strike me as a woman of great sense and strength." It was an endorsement, a public declaration of support from society's most influential woman. The effect was immediate. Other women moved forward, offering greetings and invitations. The men bowed respectfully. The tide turned so quickly it was dizzying. The scandal hadn't disappeared, it had simply been reframed. Now Rose wasn't the schemer. She was the victim, the tragic heroine rescued by her devoted duke. But John wasn't finished. The orchestra began a waltz, and John turned to Rose, held out his hand. "Dance with me, John." "I'm still shaking." "Then lean on me. I've got you." It wasn't a request. He led her to the center of the floor. Every eye in the room followed them. John pulled her closer than was strictly proper, his hand firm at her waist, his other hand enveloping hers. They began to move, and Rose felt the world narrow to just the two of them. "They're all staring," she whispered. "I know. I want them to." John's voice was low, intimate. "I want every man in this room to know you're mine. I want every woman to know I would burn London to the ground before I let anyone hurt you." Rose looked up at him, breathless. "You're mad." "About you." "Absolutely." They moved together perfectly, as if they'd been dancing their whole lives. John's eyes never left hers, dark and intense and full of promises that made her heart race. The waltz seemed to last both forever and not nearly long enough. When the music finally ended, they were standing too close, breathing too fast. John's hand remained on her waist. Rose's hand was pressed against his chest, where she could feel his heart pounding. His gaze dropped to her lips. "John." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Not here." His voice was rough, strained with control. "Not in front of them. But soon, Rose. Soon. You'll be mine in every way. I promise you that." The raw promise in his words made her knees weak. He escorted her off the floor, keeping her close to his side for the rest of the evening. People approached them now, respectfully, carefully. The Duchess of Pembroke introduced Rose to several influential ladies. Men congratulated John on his miraculous survival and his impending marriage. By the end of the night, the scandal had been thoroughly neutered. Rose was no longer the villain. She was the Duke's beloved, and London would treat her accordingly or face his wrath. When John escorted her back to Frederick Manor, they paused at the door, a moment of privacy in the darkness. "You were magnificent tonight," John said softly. "I was terrified. Bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's proceeding despite it." He touched her cheek gently. "You're the strongest woman I know, Rose." She needed to say it. Needed him to know. "John, I never loved Charles. I need you to understand that. Even when I agreed to marry him, even at that altar, my heart was always yours. Always." John's hands came up to cup her face, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. "I know. You think I don't recognize how you look at me, the way your breath catches when I'm near, the way you fit perfectly against me when we dance." His voice dropped lower. "You're mine, Rose. You've always been mine. And in 3 days, the whole world will know it." Rose's hands came up to rest on his chest. 3 days. 3 days, he confirmed. And then no more waiting, no more restraint, no more holding back. The promise, the threat, the absolute certainty in his voice made her shiver. "I should go inside," she whispered, though she didn't move. "You should," John agreed, though his hands remained on her face. Neither of them moved for a long moment, the tension between them almost unbearable. Finally, John pressed a kiss to her forehead, chaste, controlled, but his hands trembled slightly against her skin. "Good night, Rose. Sleep well." "Good night, John." She slipped inside, her heart pounding. Through the window, she watched him stride back to his waiting carriage, every line of his body taut with restrained passion. 3 more days until she was his. Rose pressed her fingers to her lips and smiled. Chapter 8. Ghosts and Promises. The morning after the ball dawned clear and crisp, winter sunlight streaming through Frederick Manor's windows. Rose woke with a strange lightness in her chest. The first morning in months, she hadn't felt the crushing weight of grief or dread. John was waiting for her after breakfast, dressed for riding, his expression warm when he saw her descending the stairs. "Come," he said, offering his arm. "I want to show you something." He led her outside, where 2 horses stood saddled and waiting. Rose hadn't ridden in months, but the moment she settled into the saddle, muscle memory returned. They rode out across the estate, the cold air bringing color to her cheeks. John guided them through the lands past tenant farms where families waved and called out greetings, through forests where deer watched them pass, across fields that would bloom with crops come spring. He spoke of yields and improvements, of the people who lived and worked here, of plans for the future. "All of this will be yours," he said, gesturing to the expanse before them. "These people, these lands, you'll help me care for them. I know nothing about managing an estate. You'll learn. And Rose," he turned to look at her, his expression serious. "My pride in this estate is nothing compared to my pride in you. Last night, watching you face down that ballroom with your head high, I've seen soldiers with less courage." They dismounted near a small lake, the same lake where he'd proposed 3 years ago. The memory hung between them, bittersweet and precious. "Tell me about the war," Rose said as they walked along the water's edge. "The real story, not the heroic version everyone wants to hear." John was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost reluctant. "It was hell. There's no other word for it. The noise, the chaos, the constant fear." He paused, his hand moving unconsciously to his side. "I was injured at Nivelles. Shrapnel to the side. The field surgeons did what they could, but infection set in. I spent 3 months in a hospital in Brussels, more dead than alive." Rose's hand found his, squeezed tight. "There were days I didn't know my own name," he continued. Days I thought I was still on the battlefield. But when the fever finally broke, when I truly woke for the first time, my first thought was of you. Not survival, not the battle, not even the pain. Just you. And when you learned of my engagement to Charles? John's jaw tightened, the muscle jumping beneath his scar. I wanted to kill him, not metaphorically. I actually considered it. I had the means, the justification. But then I realized killing him wouldn't undo what he'd done to you. It wouldn't erase your pain. Exposing him would be far more satisfying. Rose stopped walking, turned to face him. Were you afraid that I'd choose him, that I'd fallen in love with him? John stopped too, his eyes meeting hers with raw honesty. Terrified. The entire ride from Brussels to London. I thought, what if I'm too late? What if she's happy with him? What if she doesn't want me anymore? What if she's moved on and I'm just a ghost she's trying to forget? And when you saw me at the altar, I saw the look in your eyes. John's hand came up to cup her face. You weren't happy, Rose. You were trapped, like a bird in a cage. And I knew I'd do anything, risk anything, to free you, even if you hated me for it, even if you never forgave me for the scene I caused. Rose turned her face into his palm, pressed a kiss there. I could never hate you. They continued walking, and John's voice grew quieter, more uncertain. There's something you should know, something I need to tell you before we marry. What is it? I have nightmares. From the war. Sometimes I wake in the dark, reaching for a weapon that isn't there. Sometimes I don't know where I am for several minutes. He wouldn't look at her. The physicians said it would fade with time. But, will you tell me? Rose interrupted. When they happen, will you let me help? John's steps faltered. I don't want to frighten you. You won't. Rose stopped, made him face her. John, I need to know all of you, not just the Duke with his medals and his title, not just the hero who rode in to save me. I need to know the man, the real man, with all his scars and shadows. He stared at her for a long moment, something raw and vulnerable flickering across his face. The man is damaged, Rose. The war changed me. I'm harder now, less trusting. I've seen things, done things. His voice roughened. Sometimes I'm not gentle. Sometimes Rose stepped closer, placed her hand over his heart. I don't need gentle. I need real. I need you. All of you, John. The darkness and the light. The air between them shifted, charged with electricity. They'd wandered into a secluded part of the garden, hidden from the house by tall hedges and winter-bare trees. I've waited so long, John murmured, his hands coming up to frame her face. So long to have you, to hold you without fear of losing you. You have me. Rose's voice was barely a whisper. You've always had me. John pulled her closer, his forehead coming to rest against hers. His breath was warm on her lips. 2 more days, and you'll be my wife. Mine in every way. I'm already yours. The words seemed to break something in him. His mouth crashed down on hers with none of the gentleness she might have expected. This was possession, desperation, years of longing poured into a single moment. Rose kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands fisting in his coat, pulling him closer. She dreamed of this for so long, first as a joyful future, then as a grief-soaked memory, and now, impossibly, as present reality. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, John pressed his forehead to hers again. We should stop, he said, though his hands remained on her waist, holding her against him. Why? Rose was surprised by the boldness in her own voice. Because if we don't, I won't be able to. His voice was strained, rough with desire barely held in check. And you deserve a wedding night, Rose, not a garden seduction. Rose looked up at him through her lashes, feeling daring and wanted and alive. What if I want both? John groaned, the sound coming from deep in his chest. You're testing my restraint, love. Good. She smiled, and it felt like the first real smile in months. He kissed her again, softer this time but no less intense. When he pulled back, his eyes were dark with promise. 2 more days, he said again, and then I'm done restraining myself. The next day, Rose's family arrived at Frederick Manor. Her mother was radiant with joy. Her father looked like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. They embraced Rose with tears and gratitude. Later, Rose saw her father speaking privately with John in the library. She couldn't hear the words, but she saw her father's expression, shame and gratitude mingled together. When John emerged, he found Rose in the hallway. Your father is a good man who made desperate choices. I told him I understood. What did he say? That he failed you. That he put you in an impossible position. John's hand found hers. I told him you're my family now, and I will spend my life ensuring you never feel that kind of desperation again. Later that afternoon, the Dowager Duchess requested a private word with Rose. They sat in the morning room, tea growing cold between them. My dear, the Dowager began, somewhat awkwardly, I wanted to speak with you about, that is, I thought you should know about your wedding night. Rose felt heat flood her cheeks. Lady Frederick, please let me finish. The older woman's expression was kind. John is a good man, but he's also a man who has been to war. He may be intense, passionate in ways that might surprise you. I don't want you to be frightened. Rose thought of the kiss in the garden, of the barely restrained desire in John's eyes. I'm not frightened. I trust him. The Dowager smiled, relief evident in her features. Good. Then you'll be very happy together. That evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, Rose found herself in the portrait gallery. She stood before John's painting, remembering all the time she'd come here in her grief. Having second thoughts, she turned to find John in the doorway, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Never, she said honestly. I was just thinking this is where I used to come, after you were declared dead. I'd stand here and talk to this painting like you could hear me. John crossed the room to stand beside her. What did you say? I told you I loved you, that I'd wait for you, even in death, that no one would ever replace you in my heart. Rose's voice grew softer. That I was sorry I wasn't strong enough to wait longer. And then Charles proposed, and I said yes, because I thought I had to. She turned to face John fully. But John, every moment with him, I was comparing him to you. The way he spoke, the way he moved, the way he looked at me, none of it was right. None of it was you. He never measured up. John's arms came around her, pulling her close. Tomorrow, you'll never have to compare again. Tomorrow, you'll be mine. Legally, publicly, completely. Rose smiled against his chest. I'm already completely yours. Tomorrow just makes it official. They stood together in the gallery as darkness fell outside, wrapped in each other and the promise of tomorrow. Finally, reluctantly, they parted. Tradition dictated he shouldn't see her until the wedding. At her chamber door, John took her hand, raised it to his lips. Sleep well, my future Duchess. Tomorrow, our life begins. But Rose, alone in her room as the clock struck midnight, couldn't sleep. Anticipation thrummed through her veins. Anticipation, joy, and desire. Tomorrow, she would marry the man she loved. Tomorrow, she would finally be his, and she could hardly wait. Chapter 9. The Duchess. Rose woke on her wedding morning with sunlight streaming through the windows and joy singing in her veins. No dread, no fear, no crushing grief, just pure, radiant happiness. Her mother appeared shortly after dawn, tears already shimmering in her eyes. Oh, my darling, today is finally here. The gown Rose had chosen herself lay waiting, white silk and delicate lace, elegant in its simplicity. As her mother and the maids helped her dress, Rose caught her reflection in the looking-glass and barely recognized herself. She was glowing, transformed by happiness. Lady Margaret arrived as they were fixing Rose's veil, her expression warm with affection. You're radiant. You look like a woman about to marry the love of her life. Rose smiled, felt it reach all the way to her soul. I am. Finally, after everything, I am. The private chapel at Frederick Manor was intimate, adorned with winter roses and candlelight. Only close family and friends had been invited. No spectacle this time, no society watching with hungry eyes, just the people who mattered. Rose stood at the chapel entrance, her arm through her father's. He looked at her with such love and pride that her eyes misted. Be happy, my darling, he whispered. You deserve it. You deserve all the happiness in the world. Then the doors opened, and Rose saw John. He stood at the altar in his military dress uniform, medals gleaming on his chest, the scar on his face a mark of everything he'd survived to return to her. When their eyes met, his expression transformed pure love, pure possession, pure joy. Rose barely remembered walking down the aisle. She was aware only of John, of the way he watched her approach as if she were the most precious thing in existence. Her father placed her hand in John's, and the warmth of his grip steadied her trembling. The vicar began the ceremony, his voice sonorous in the small chapel. The traditional words took on new meaning, weighted with everything they'd survived. When it came time for the vows, John's voice was steady and strong, but his eyes blazed with intensity. I, John, take thee, Rose, to be my wedded wife. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. And when he said, with my body I thee worship, his voice dropped to something intimate and possessive that made heat flood Rose's cheeks and her breath catch. Then it was her turn. Rose's voice didn't waver, filled with certainty and willing devotion. I, Rose, take thee, John, to be my wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love, honor, and obey, till death do us part. The word obey wasn't spoken with resignation, but with eager acceptance. She was choosing this, choosing him, completely. John slipped the ring onto her finger, a band of gold that caught the candlelight and gleamed like a promise. The vicar smiled. I now pronounce you man and wife. Your Grace, you may kiss your bride. John didn't hesitate. He pulled Rose into his arms and kissed her with a passion that was utterly inappropriate for a chapel and absolutely perfect for them. He kissed her like she was his salvation, his future, his entire world, like he'd fought through hell to reach this moment and intended to savor every second. The small gathering erupted in applause and laughter. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Rose was blushing furiously but laughing. My Duchess, John murmured against her forehead. My Duke, she whispered back. The reception was held in Frederick Manor's drawing room, intimate and joyful. The Dowager Duchess offered the first toast, her voice thick with emotion. To my son, who refused to let death keep him from love, and to Rose, who brings light back to this family. May your happiness know no bounds. Rose's father stood next, his voice unsteady. To the Duke and Duchess of Frederick, thank you, Your Grace, for saving my daughter. And Rose, I am so very proud of you. Lady Margaret's toast was lighter, witty and warm, drawing laughter from the small gathering. To Rose and John, may your love story inspire poets, though perhaps with fewer dramatic interruptions in the future. Food was served, champagne flowed, but Rose noticed John growing increasingly restless. His hand found hers under the table, his thumb stroking her palm in a way that sent shivers up her arm. Finally, after barely an hour, John stood. His voice carried across the room with absolute authority. My wife and I are retiring for the evening. It was barely past 2 in the afternoon. The entire room erupted in knowing laughter. Rose's cheeks burned, but before she could even stand, John swept her up into his arms. She gasped, her arms going around his neck as he carried her toward the door. John, you're my wife now, he said, his voice low and filled with promise. I'm done waiting. He carried her through the halls of Frederick Manor, up the grand staircase, to the ducal suite that would now be theirs. Once inside, he set her down gently, then turned and locked the door with a decisive click. The sound seemed to echo in the sudden quiet. John turned back to her, and the look in his eyes made Rose's heart race. Finally, you're mine, my wife, my Duchess. Rose stepped toward him, bold with happiness and desire. Yours, always yours. He crossed to her in 2 strides, his hands framing her face. I love you, Rose. I have loved you through death and distance and every obstacle between us. And now we have forever, Rose finished. Their kiss was hungry, desperate, years of longing finally unleashed. John's hands tangled in her hair, scattering pins. Rose's fingers worked at the buttons of his uniform. I love you, she whispered against his lips. I love you so much. John lifted her again, carried her toward the bed, and the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows illuminated the beginning of their life together. Epilogue. 6 months later, summer, 1818. Rose sat at the desk in the estate office, reviewing tenant requests with practiced efficiency. Marriage had brought her into full partnership with John in managing the duchy, and she'd discovered a talent for it, particularly for the personal aspects, for understanding what the people needed and finding creative solutions. You're a natural at this, John said from the doorway, watching her with obvious pride. Rose looked up, smiled. I have a good teacher. He crossed to her, dropped a kiss on top of her head, looked over her shoulder at her notes. Mrs. Patterson's roof repair, already arranged, and I've scheduled a visit to the tenants next week. Several of the children need new shoes before school starts. John's hand rested on her shoulder, squeezed gently. Have I told you today how magnificent you are? Not in the last hour, at least. They were interrupted by a servant bringing the afternoon post. Rose sorted through the correspondence, then froze when she saw a letter with a Cornwall postmark. John noticed immediately. It's all right. Open it. With trembling fingers, Rose broke the seal. The letter was brief, the handwriting stiff. Your Grace, I hear congratulations are in order on the upcoming arrival. I wish you both well. I am attempting to make something of myself here, managing the estate as best I can. I doubt I'll ever earn forgiveness for what I've done. Perhaps that's as it should be. C.F. Rose looked up at John. What should we do? John took the letter, scanned it, then set it aside. Nothing. He's where he belongs. If he truly changes, time will tell. But Rose, he's not our concern anymore. No, Rose agreed, relief flooding through her. He's not. She set the letter aside without another thought, her attention already back on more important matters. Later that afternoon, they walked together in the gardens. The summer heat was pleasant, the roses in full bloom. They stopped at the lake, where John had first proposed so many years ago. Do you remember what you said when you proposed here? Rose asked, leaning against him. John's arm came around her waist. I said, Lady Rose Montgomery, you are the only woman I will ever love. Marry me, and I'll spend my life making you happy. And have you? Rose looked up at him, her expression teasing. Made me happy. John actually looked concerned. Have I? Rose laughed, the sound bright and joyful. She took his hand, placed it gently on her stomach, which was just beginning to show the slight swell of new life. Deliriously. So happy, in fact, that you're going to be a father. For a moment, John simply stared at her, the words not quite registering. Then, understanding flooded his features, shock, followed by overwhelming joy. He pulled her into his arms, held her like she was the most precious thing in the world. His voice was rough with emotion. A child. Our child. Are you pleased? Pleased. John pulled back just enough to look at her, and she saw tears shimmering in his eyes. Rose, you've given me everything. Life, love, purpose, and now this. How could I be anything but overjoyed? He dropped to his knees right there in the grass, pressed his forehead against her stomach. Hello, little one, he whispered. I'm your father, and I promise you I will protect you and your mother with everything I am. Rose's hands tangled in his hair, her own tears falling freely. They sat together in the garden as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Rose leaned back against John's chest, his arms wrapped protectively around her, his hand resting on their growing child. Sometimes I think about that day in the church, Rose said quietly. What would have happened if you hadn't arrived? Don't. John's arms tightened around her. I can't bear to think of it, but you did arrive. You fought your way back to me through impossible odds. You saved me. We saved each other, love. John pressed a kiss to her temple. You gave me a reason to survive, a reason to fight through every obstacle. I gave you freedom to love without fear. Rose turned in his arms, looked up at him. No more lies, no more ghosts, John agreed. Just us, always. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting Frederick Manor in twilight. Behind them, the house glowed with warm light, their home, their sanctuary, their future. Before them, the gardens stretched out in summer abundance, full of life and promise. Rose's hand rested on her stomach, on the life growing within her. John's hand covered hers, protective and possessive and infinitely tender. They had survived death and betrayal, manipulation and scandal. They had found their way back to each other through every obstacle fate had thrown in their path. And now, finally, they had forever. The Duke had come home from war, and he'd brought his Duchess with him. And so, Rose and John found their happily ever after, a love that survived death, betrayal, and impossible odds. Their story reminds us that true love is worth fighting for, no matter the obstacles. If you enjoyed Rose and John's journey from heartbreak to happiness, please show your support by liking this video and subscribing to Lyra's Romance Stories for more sweeping historical romances filled with passion, drama, and unforgettable love stories. I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. What was your favorite moment in this story? Was it John's dramatic return at the church? The way he publicly claimed Rose at the ball? Or perhaps their tender moments in the garden? Let me know what captured your heart. And if you're craving more Victorian romance, check out the video appearing on your screen right now. Another tale of forbidden love, second chances, and a duke who will stop at nothing to protect the woman he loves. Thank you so much for spending this time with me in the world of Rose and John. Until our next story, remember, true love is always worth the fight. This is Lyra's Romance Stories, and I'll see you in the next tale.
Shocking disclosures in the Christmas Evening News.
One moment, lad. Let me see that.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Evening News. Get your Evening News here.